Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a source, stack articles, research papers, sometimes forgotten KGB reports, and use it to peel back the layers of a truly foundational moment in history.
Today we are strapping in for the 108 minutes that changed the 20th century.
And we aren't just reciting history. We're really looking for the character notes, the technical controversies, and, the immense personal pressures that were placed upon the man who became the living symbol of the space age.
Exactly. When you hear the name Yuri Gagarin, you immediately picture that smiling, young, universally recognized icon.
The first man in space, that was April 12, 1961. But that image, that perfectly polished, charismatic, state-sponsored smile, that's really the propaganda icon.
And our mission for this deep dive is to synthesize the story from the sources we've got, focusing in on the surprising facts of his origin, the profound and really debilitating pressures of sudden global celebrity.
Right, and this sticky political controversy around how his records were even certified.
And of course, the enduring uncertainty surrounding his final tragic flight. We're looking for the nuggets of knowledge that go far beyond that Vostok 1 headline to truly understand the price of being a legend.
And the stakes, as you rightly point out, were monumental. Gagarin achieved a victory for the Soviet Union at the absolute height of the Cold War space race.
I mean, that single orbit lasting just 108 minutes, it secured a political and technological triumph that really, it validated the entire Soviet system for decades.
It was an unparalleled success. But the man, elevated to, well, almost demigod status, became almost immediately a prisoner of his own success.
What we often call a gilded cage. His life from that point on was just no longer his own.
Okay, so let's unpack this and start at the very beginning, which is about as far away from the massive Baikonur Cosmodrome as you could possibly imagine.
We're looking at the early life and the making of this Soviet hero, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin.
And his beginnings were, they were defined by necessity and struggle.
Which, ironically, made him the perfect symbol for the Soviet narrative of the common working man achieving the absolute pinnacle of human endeavor.
He was born on March 9, 1934, in the tiny village of Klushino in the Smolensk region of the Russian SFSR.
And when we describe his background as humble, we mean solidly working class, tied directly to the land. His parents, Alexey Ivanovich and Anna Timofeevna, worked on a sovkhoz,
a state-owned collective farm. His father was a carpenter and his mother a dairy farmer.
Right, and Yuri was the third of 4 children, growing up in a busy agrarian environment where, survival relied on communal effort.
This collective farm background meant his entire family was integrated into the official socialist structure, which really reinforces the idea that Soviet citizens, even from rural areas, could achieve anything.
But those formative years were brutally interrupted by global conflict. The scars of World War II on the Gagarin family were profound and immediate.
The sources show the level of suffering was just immense and so personal. The Nazis captured Klushino on October 18, 1941.
And their actions immediately dismantled Yuri's life. On that first day of occupation, the Germans burned down the local school,
which abruptly ended 7-year-old Yuri's first year of education.
That abrupt interruption was just the start. The family was evicted from their home when a Nazi officer took it over for his residence.
Just imagine that psychological trauma. Watching a foreign enemy displace your family from your own home.
And they were left with literally nothing.
Nothing but their own ingenuity. What the family was forced to build to survive was this tiny, cramped mud hut, just 3 meters by 3 meters.
Which they constructed behind their former house. They were forced to live there for 21 months until the Red Army liberated the region in 1943.
And you have this child, 8 or 9 years old, witnessing this intense level of deprivation, control, and constant fear.
But it wasn't a time for children to simply be passive victims. The sources reveal a fascinating detail about how this deprivation actually fueled a defiant spark in young Yuri.
Right, he wasn't just observing the suffering.
No, he actively participated in acts of quiet rebellion, becoming effectively a child saboteur.
And this is where it gets really interesting and surprising, and it speaks directly to the type of character who risks his life on a rocket.
Well, the impetus for this defiance was a particularly cruel German soldier whom the local children called the Devil. After the soldier tried to physically harm Yuri's younger brother Boris, Yuri decided to fight back,
using whatever small means he had available.
It's a profound character note. The sources detail specific acts of resistance. He poured soil into the massive tank batteries that the German soldiers were gathering for recharging, silently rendering them useless.
He also randomly mixed up the different chemical supplies and reagents the soldier was using for various purposes.
I mean, these are small, silent, incredibly dangerous acts of defiance.
It tells you that resilience wasn't just about surviving. It was about fighting back, even when the odds were impossibly stacked against you.
Exactly. That willingness to take an existential risk for a moral cause, even childhood justice, was present long before the Air Force came calling. That's a key nugget we need to hold on to.
Absolutely. So post-war, the family moved to Gazatsk, and Yuri was an intellectually driven kid. He excelled particularly in math and science.
And his interest in flight wasn't abstract. It was sparked by a tangible, dramatic event. A Yakovlev fighter plane actually crash-landed near Kushino during the war.
Seeing that machinery up close, seeing the technology of freedom and warfare, that must have been a pivotal moment that channeled his ambition.
But the path to the cockpit wasn't immediate or easy. At age 16, he began his working career, adhering strictly to the Soviet educational model. He became a foundryman at a steel plant in Lyubertsy near Moscow.
Where he earned vocational honors in mold making and foundry work.
And that detail matters. Mold making and foundry work are highly technical, demanding fields involving material science, precision, and high temperatures. He wasn't doing simple manual labor.
No, he was mastering a skilled trade, which further cemented that official worker hero backstory. He then moved on to the technical college in Saratov to study tractors.
So, tractors to jets.
It sounds like an impossible leap. But was this vocational track designed to feed into the military and engineering apparatus of the USSR?
Precisely. The Soviet system structured technical education to identify and recruit promising individuals for specialized roles.
So while studying in Saratov, he volunteered for weekend training at a local flying club.
A very rigorous introduction, starting with biplanes and later moving up to the powerful Yakovlev Yak-18. By 1955, his skills earned him acceptance into the first Chokolov Higher Air Force Pilot School in Orenburg.
And this is where we uncover another truly fantastic humanizing detail that shows just how close the Soviet Union came to missing out on the first man in space entirely.
The Christian story.
It's incredible. What's truly astonishing here is that a man destined to complete one of the greatest technical feats in history struggled immensely with the basic function of landing a jet.
He was training on the advanced MiG-15 jet fighter, and he failed to land the two-seater trainer aircraft successfully twice and faced outright dismissal from the program.
It sounds like it might have been a psychological block under pressure, but the reality, as noted in the sources, was purely physical.
Right. His flight instructor, sensing the issue wasn't skill or nerve, noticed the real impediment was visibility. Gagarin was only 1.57 meters tall.
Which is about 5 feet 2 inches.
And the geometry of the MiG-15 cockpit, particularly the two-seater trainer model, meant that a pilot of his stature simply couldn't achieve the proper sightlines and angles needed to judge the final approach.
His short stature literally prevented him from seeing the runway markers correctly.
So the fix was brilliantly simple. His instructor just gave him a thick cushion to sit on.
That modest elevation corrected his sightline, and suddenly he could land successfully. I mean, think about the profound historical randomness of that moment.
A simple cushion saved the entire Vostok program and altered the course of the space race.
It's the perfect illustration that history often turns on the smallest, most overlooked details.
So he graduated as a lieutenant in 1957, was posted to the 769th Fighter Aviation Regiment near the Norwegian border, and accumulated a solid 265 hours of flight time by October 1959.
He was a solid, skilled, if vertically challenged fighter pilot, ready for the next challenge.
And that background, the blend of foundry work, wartime resilience, and proven Air Force experience, made him, against all odds, the perfect physical and ideological candidate for the next phase of Soviet ambition.
The Vostok program.
So let's talk about the selection process, because it was brutal and highly restrictive. The limitations tell you everything you need to know about the Vostok capsule itself.
It was effectively a metal sphere built to carry a human being.
Designed under immense time constraints and therefore tiny.
The commission restricted candidates to pilots between 25 and 30 years old, but the real limits were set by Chief Engineer Sergei Korolev.
Korolev's capsule design was dictated by the power of the Soviet R-7 rocket. The candidates absolutely had to weigh less than 72 kilograms, about 159 pounds, and be no taller than 1.70 meters, so 5 feet 7 inches.
So Gagarin's stature, which almost got him kicked out of flight school, suddenly became his defining advantage.
Exactly. His 1.57-meter height meant he literally fit the physical mold set by the program's engineering limitations. The fact that the first man in space had to be short and light is a testament to the constraints of early rocketry.
The selection funnel was intense. They started with 154 qualified pilots, narrowed that down to 29 candidates.
Approved 20, and finally selected the group known as the Vanguard 6, also called the Sochi 6 or the Lilies.
And the training regimen they endured was rigorous in the extreme, designed to break them down and rebuild them.
Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov described it as being akin to training for the Olympic Games, but with the added terror of knowing the hardware was fundamentally untested.
We're talking about physiological and psychological limits being pushed constantly. 40 to 50 parachute jumps, including complex land and water recoveries.
Punishing G-forces in the centrifuge, simulating both ascent and re-entry loads that could crush a lesser man.
But the truly fascinating tests were the psychological ones.
The deepest part of the testing involved the anechoic chamber, where candidates were locked in complete sensory deprivation for 10 days straight.
Which was designed to find out who could withstand the profound loneliness and psychological pressures of being completely isolated, no sound, no external stimuli.
And often limited communication. The resulting psychological profile assessment of Gagarin is one of the most revealing documents in the sources.
They noted he was modest, possessed a fantastic memory, and distinguished himself by his sharp and far-ranging sense of attention to his surroundings.
And crucially, they also noted his intellectual strength. He excels in higher mathematics, and maybe most importantly for later political conflicts, he does not feel constrained when he has to defend his point of view if he considers himself right.
That suggests a strong inner confidence and moral compass, characteristics that likely helped him survive the immense fame that followed.
And that character translated into consensus. When the Vanguard 6 peer group was asked to vote anonymously for who they thought should fly first, excluding themselves, all but 3 candidates voted for Gagarin.
He was clearly the peer favorite, seen as the most stable and reliable choice.
His intellectual capability combined with his humble origins and proven stability made him the definitive choice. He was formally ranked the best candidate by the Special Interdepartmental Commission on January 18, 1961.
And the final decision was announced just 4 days before launch. Gagarin as the primary pilot and German Titov as his backup.
And then the historic day arrived, April 12, 1961. The spacecraft was the Vostok 3KA-3, launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome. Gagarin used the call sign Kedra,
Meaning Siberian cedar, maybe a nod to his origins in the Russian forests.
The culmination of decades of effort, the launch sequence, provided one of the most famous quotes in human history. The radio dialogue recorded Chief Engineer Sergei Korolev counting down, and then
The spontaneous, informal phrase that immediately entered the global lexicon. Poyakali.
off we go.
That single enthusiastic exclamation instantly became synonymous with the start of the space age. The whole flight, as we noted, was incredibly brief, just 108 minutes, a single orbit of Earth.
And the flight wasn't just a technical test, it was an unprecedented human experience. In his post-flight report, Gagarin meticulously documented his feelings.
He described the feeling of weightlessness as somewhat unfamiliar compared with Earth conditions. He wrote that it felt as if you were hanging in a horizontal position in straps. You feel as if you were suspended.
He wasn't just surviving, he was functioning. We know he remained highly engaged, even singing a patriotic tune, "The Motherland Hears, the Motherland Knows," during re-entry.
And the Soviet reaction was immediate and decisive. While he was still orbiting Earth, he was recognized as a qualified military pilot first class and promoted from senior lieutenant directly to major.
A major in 108 minutes. It's unbelievable. Now, we absolutely must address the major point of controversy that surrounded this flight and tainted the historical record for decades.
The ejection. This is a crucial detail that was initially covered up entirely for political reasons.
Let's pause on this because this is where Cold War politics clashes with technical reality. The sources confirm that at an altitude of about 7,000 meters or 23,000 feet, Gagarin ejected from the descending Vostok capsule.
Exactly as was planned for safety reasons. He landed separately by his own parachute, miles from the scorched Vostok sphere.
The problem was an obscure technical organization called the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, the FAI, which governed aerospace records at the time.
And their regulations, derived largely from pre-jet age aviation and ballooning records, required the pilot to land with the craft to officially certify records for altitude, duration, and mass.
So if you ejected, you hadn't technically completed the flight, as defined by their rules.
It's pure bureaucracy threatening a monumental achievement.
So, the Soviet officials, prioritizing the narrative of total seamless technological success, a perfect launch, perfect orbit, and perfect landing, simply refused to admit that he had ejected.
Why compromise the perfect story over an international technicality?
They feared the West would use this detail to invalidate their claim as the first to space. So, Gagarin and Soviet officials lied. This political cover-up lasted for years, only becoming fully apparent when subsequent cosmonauts, like Titov, also used the ejection system upon return.
But the FAI ultimately recognized the reality of the situation. They were pragmatic.
Right, they eventually revised their definition of spaceflight records. They acknowledged the safe launch, orbit, and return of the pilot, and certified his records anyway.
So it was a conflict between a strict, outdated rule and an undeniable human achievement.
Gagarin's position as the first man to orbit Earth was internationally recognized and secured, regardless of whether he rode the final few miles inside or beside the Vostok descent module. He was the first to survive orbit and return safely to Earth.
And that was the definitive achievement.
Survival, as we know, led to global celebration, but that celebration came with an extraordinarily high personal cost.
Gagarin immediately transitioned from being an elite fighter pilot to becoming what the sources accurately describe as prisoner of fame.
The reaction in the Soviet Union was explosive, transforming the man instantly into a state asset. He was awarded the highest honors, Hero of the Soviet Union and the Order of Lenin.
His celebration in Moscow was a 12-mile parade attended by millions, with mass demonstrations whose scale was second only to the massive World War II victory parades.
He became the human face of Soviet technological supremacy. Known globally for his charismatic smile and his natural ability as a public figure, he was instantly the world's most famous person.
But that smile, as the sources reveal, masked immense, unprecedented pressure and personal instability.
He embarked on this grueling, non-stop global diplomatic tour designed to showcase Soviet superiority. He accepted invitations from approximately 30 countries within the first few years.
In the first 4 months alone, he was shuffled between nations like Poland, Brazil, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Finland, Hungary, Iceland, and the United Kingdom.
This wasn't just diplomacy, it was the Cold War being fought through relentless international celebrity.
And let's focus on the diplomatic impact for a moment, because this is where the character shines through the political role. The sources highlight the tour of Manchester in the UK.
The weather was famously terrible, heavy, typical Manchester rain. But Gagarin insisted that the convertible roof of his car remain open and that he refuse an umbrella.
He stood the entire time, drenched, so the hundreds of thousands of cheering crowds could see him.
That shows a profound dedication to the role of the hero, willing to endure personal discomfort to connect with the people. It solidified his image as the humble, dedicated man of the people, even in the West.
Meanwhile, the political establishment in the West was scrambling to manage his overwhelming popularity. We know U.S. President John F. Kennedy actually barred Gagarin from visiting the United States.
They didn't want the world's biggest celebrity, the embodiment of communist success, selling the Soviet system on American soil. It's a measure of his soft power.
And domestically, the state gave him every honor possible. He was elected as a deputy to the Soviet of the Union in 1962 and the Soviet of Nationalities in 1964.
But these were largely symbolic legislative bodies within the Supreme Soviet.
Right, that's a critical distinction. He had status and proximity to power, but the question is, did he have operational power? He was given the highest status, but functionally, he was put into a golden cage.
Precisely. Soviet officials, notably Lieutenant General Nikolai Kamanin, immediately banned him from further spaceflights.
And Kaman cited the official line: Gagarin was too dear to mankind to risk his life for the sake of an ordinary spaceflight. The implication being, the world cannot afford to lose the symbol.
But the sources also provide crucial expert context that reveals the darker truth. Kamanin was deeply concerned by the toll fame had taken on Gagarin personally,
Specifically noting concerns about his increased drinking and the deterioration of his flying skills, the core skill that got him the job in the first place.
The pressure cooker of being the world's most famous man was immense and destructive. The sources detail a specific incident at a Black Sea resort in September 1961, just months after his flight, that perfectly illustrates his crumbling private life.
He was caught by his wife during a liaison with a nurse. In a desperate, panicked attempt to escape, he tried to jump off a second-floor balcony,
resulting in a severe injury that left a permanent scar above his left eyebrow.
That scar, hidden behind the public smile, was a physical manifestation of the mental and social strain he was under. He wasn't allowed to be a man. He had to be a monument.
And the ultimate professional tragedy, however, came during the catastrophic Soyuz 1 flight in 1967. Gagarin served as backup pilot for his close friend Vladimir Komarov.
This flight, which ended in tragedy, was heavily scrutinized. The sources indicate the launch was rushed due to enormous, implicit political pressures.
Likely tied to competing with the U.S. and the desire to launch a major mission to mark the upcoming 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution.
And here we see that trait the psychologist identified during his training, the willingness to defend his point of view if he considers himself right, come into play dramatically.
Gagarin, recognizing the inherent technical flaws, actually documented his protests to the Politburo, stating that additional safety precautions were necessary and that the capsule was not flight ready.
He used his political capital to try and save the mission, knowing full well the risks, but the pressure from the top was overriding.
And he was correct to protest. Komarov died when the Soyuz 1 crash-landed after its parachutes failed to open. Gagarin was heartbroken.
She had stood with Komarov at the launch and was relaying instructions to him from ground control during the subsequent system failures.
And following this devastating tragedy, Gagarin was permanently and firmly banned from any further spaceflight. The state could not risk losing a second icon so soon.
It seemed like that tragedy cemented the end of his active operational career. But he fought back against the official grounding with an intellectual fervor.
He worked tirelessly to lift the ban that prohibited him from flying regular aircraft solo. And intellectually, he pushed forward, focusing on the future of flight.
In February 1968, he successfully defended his aerospace engineering thesis on spaceplane aerodynamic configuration and graduated cum laude from the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy.
He wasn't just resting on his fame, he was trying to pivot to a powerful engineering and administrative role in the program, perhaps managing the next generation of reusable craft.
He had regained his solo flight status just 5 weeks before his death, suggesting he was finally breaking free of the golden cage.
And that brings us to the ultimate, enduring question mark that still haunts the global space age: the death of Yuri Gagarin and the competing theories surrounding his fatal accident.
On March 27, 1968, Gagarin and his flight instructor, Vladimir Seryozhin, were conducting what was meant to be a routine training flight in a two-seater MiG-15 UTI jet.
They crashed near the town of Kursak. Gagarin was only 34 years old.
The Soviet reaction was intense national mourning, followed immediately by complete, dense operational and bureaucratic secrecy. Their ashes were interred with full honors in the Kremlin Wall necropolis.
But because the true cause was so uncertain and the state's immediate response was to suppress information, speculation and conspiracy theories just exploded.
Secrecy, as always, breeds mistrust. The sources confirmed that at least 3 separate investigations were immediately launched, one by the Air Force, one by official government commissions.
And a third, shadow investigation run by the KGB. One biographer noted that the KGB worked not just alongside the Air Force and the official commission members, but against them, trying to control the narrative from the beginning.
So let's break down the 3 primary theories, starting with the findings from the KGB report, which was finally declassified in 2003.
The KGB report definitively concluded that the crash was a result of compounded human error and poor oversight by airbase personnel. They cited 2 very specific and critical contributing factors.
Okay, what were they?
First, an air traffic controller provided Gagarin's crew with outdated weather information, leading the crew to believe their altitude was several hundred meters higher than it actually was.
And the second major factor?
The ground crew had left external fuel tanks attached to the MiG-15 UTI. Now, this is a vital technical detail. Gagarin's planned flight activities were training maneuvers that required clear performance characteristics.
So the 2 outboard fuel tanks, designed for long-range combat, added significant weight and critically significant aerodynamic drag.
And why does the external drag and weight matter so much in this scenario?
It dramatically changed the aircraft's stall speed and spin recovery profile.
So the official KGB conclusion was that the aircraft entered a violent spin, either because of a bird strike, which happened suddenly, or, more likely, a sharp, necessary avoidance maneuver to miss an unidentified object or aircraft.
And because the crew believed their altitude was high enough, they reacted too slowly to pull the heavier, drag-affected MiG-15 out of the resulting dive and spin before hitting the ground.
An avoidable tragedy born of bureaucratic failure.
Okay, so theory number 1 is compounded bureaucratic and operational failure leading to mechanical inability to recover. But there are credible alternatives, including one advanced by the original crash investigator in 2005.
Right, the one revolving around the cabin environment.
This is the cabin vent theory, and it's terrifyingly simple. It hypothesizes that a cabin air vent was accidentally left open, either by Gagarin's crew before takeoff, or, perhaps more likely, left open by the previous pilot.
At the high altitude where they were flying, the catastrophic result of an open vent would have been extremely rapid oxygen deprivation.
Leading to, what exactly? Incapacitation.
Incapacitation. The crew would have become disoriented, confused, or entirely lost consciousness, leading to them losing control of the aircraft while performing a routine maneuver.
There's a similar theory, which appeared in Air and Space Smithsonian magazine, that's slightly different but still focuses on the air vent.
In that version, the crew detected the open vent and immediately executed the prescribed emergency procedure, which involved a rapid dive to a much lower altitude to quickly repressurize the cabin.
But during that rapid high-G descent, the crew may have lost consciousness or become disoriented due to the sudden altitude shift while still fighting the effects of oxygen deprivation.
They crashed before they could pull up. In this scenario, the procedure designed to save them is what killed them due to the delay in detection.
So both the KGB and the cabin vent theories blame some form of crew incapacitation or improper response due to external or internal factors. But maybe the most compelling and dramatic alternative theory
The one that implies the largest cover-up.
comes from cosmonaut Alexei Leonov.
And Leonov is a critical witness. He was a member of the Official Investigation Commission, and, crucially, he was flying parachute training near the area that day. He claims he heard two loud booms in the distance immediately preceding the crash time.
So Leonov's conclusion shifts the blame entirely to a third, unauthorized aircraft. He believes a powerful Sukhoi Su-15 fighter jet was flying well below its minimum approved altitude.
And due to the poor weather conditions, the same weather conditions that confused Gagarin's controller, the Sukhoi pilot was flying visually and didn't realize how close he was, passing within a terrifyingly close 10 or 20 meters of the MiG-15 UTI.
And when a massive, powerful jet like the Su-15 passes that close to a smaller aircraft at high speed, what happens?
The displacement of air, coupled with the plane potentially breaking the sound barrier, generates a tremendous atmospheric turbulence. Essentially a violent high-speed shockwave.
Which would have instantly sent Gagarin's lighter, already burdened MiG-15, into an uncontrolled, unrecoverable spin too low to recover from.
So the two booms Leonov heard were, first, the Sukhoi breaking the sound barrier, and second, Gagarin's plane impacting the ground.
That's Leonov's theory, and it's very compelling. It means the crash was caused by a random, devastating encounter with a massive force of air.
But it also required a massive, immediate cover-up to protect the surviving Su-15 pilot and the state's already strained aerospace reputation following the Soyuz 1 disaster.
So the bureaucratic failure theory from the KGB is just easier to digest than a cover-up of gross negligence.
Exactly.
Regardless of the final unproven cause, Gagarin's flight cemented his legacy forever. The tributes and commemorations started immediately, demonstrating that the world had truly lost a universal figure.
The date of his flight, April 12, has been celebrated as Cosmonautics Day in the USSR and Russia since 1962.
And since 2000, there's been Yuri's Night, an international celebration of space exploration that the UN declared the International Day of Human Spaceflight in 2011.
His achievement literally gave us a new global holiday.
They didn't just rename the day, they renamed places and institutions to reflect his importance. The launch pad at Baikonur is now known globally as Gagarin's Start.
The Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, where he once trained, was renamed the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in 1968.
And even his humble hometown of Gizgatsk was renamed Gagarin in his honor.
His influence extends far beyond Earth, transcending geopolitical conflict. Consider the profound gesture made by the Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin.
They carried a memorial satchel to the moon's surface in 1969, containing medals for both Gagarin and his fallen friend Komarov, acknowledging the ultimate sacrifice of the Soviet pioneers.
And 2 years later, the Apollo 15 astronauts left the fallen astronaut sculpture at their landing site, listing Gagarin's name among the deceased space pioneers.
He is literally written into the lunar landscape, with a massive 262-kilometer-wide crater on the far side of the moon also bearing his name.
And the scale of his memorials on Earth is equally impressive. The major monument to Yuri Gagarin in Moscow, unveiled in 1980, is an impressive 38-meter-tall structure mounted on a titanium pedestal.
Complete with a replica of his Vostok descent module, titanium, the metal of the aerospace industry, symbolizing his place in history.
And we're seeing a renewed global non-political recognition, too. A bust of Gagarin, sculpted by his friend Alexei Leonov, was unveiled in Houston in 2012.
Right at NASA's original spaceflight headquarters. It speaks to the recognition of his universal achievement, transcending those intense Cold War borders we discussed earlier.
And if you look at the most recent sources, his influence is still being used actively for diplomatic cooperation, especially in non-Western spheres. In November 2025, a monument to Gagarin was unveiled in Fatima Jinnah Park in Islamabad, Pakistan.
Specifically symbolizing bilateral cooperation between Russia and Pakistan. His image remains a powerful global currency for collaboration.
And his image is physically massive. In 2019, Italian artist Jorit painted the world's largest portrait mural of Gagarin on the facade of a 20-story building in Odintsovo, Russia.
From lunar craters to colossal murals, his visual legacy is inescapable and constantly being refreshed.
And he's also honored extensively in music, from Soviet patriotic songs like the constellation Gagarin to more modern compositions, perhaps most notably the song Gagarin by the instrumental band Public Service Broadcasting.
Even the Soyuz TMA-21 spacecraft was named Gagarin for the 50th anniversary of his mission. His name is embedded in the cultural and physical infrastructure of space exploration. So we have traced the journey of Yuri Gagarin from a working-class wartime foundryman to a global hero, a reluctant diplomat, an aspiring engineer, and finally, a figure grounded by his own fame, tragically killed in an unsolved accident.
But to close this deep dive, we need to return to the tension between the man and the myth, specifically the most famous quote attributed to him regarding religion.
The famous quote is, of course, "I don't see any God out here," often cited globally as definitive proof that the manned spaceflight was a victory for Soviet atheism and a crushing blow to religious faith.
And the official Soviet position certainly upheld this narrative. His state-sanctioned autobiography, which we know was primarily prepared by writers from the communist government's official newspaper, Pravda,
Included a passage claiming the manned flight was a crushing blow to the churchmen and expressed pleasure that believers, quote, impressed by the achievements of science, renounced God.
This was the state's intended narrative, a powerful piece of propaganda designed to advance the ideological goals of the USSR.
However, when we consult the primary source materials, specifically the verbatim transcripts of the Vostok 1 flight, the absolute consensus is that the flight contained no such quote.
It was simply never said in space.
Which raises the important question. If Gagarin, the man in the capsule, didn't say it, where exactly did this monumental statement originate?
A close friend of Gagarin's, Colonel Valentin Petrov, stated in a 2006 interview that the quote actually originated from a political speech given by Nikita Khrushchev
At a plenum of the Central Committee of the CPSU regarding the state's ongoing anti-religion campaign.
Exactly. Khrushchev simply stated that Gagarin flew into space but didn't see any God there, and the quote was immediately and permanently attributed to Yuri.
So the state appropriated a simple scientific fact that space is empty of deities and weaponized it for ideological and political purposes, burying the reality of the man himself.
And the reality of Gagarin's personal life further complicates this official state-sanctioned myth. Petrov and other sources state that Gagarin was baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church as a child.
We also have details confirming that his family celebrated major Christian holidays despite the official state atheism. A rector of the Orthodox Church in Star City stated in 2011 that Gagarin has secretly baptized his eldest daughter, Yelena, shortly before his spaceflight.
And that his family celebrated Christmas and Easter and kept icons in the house. The public hero was not the private man.
The Vostok 1 flight lasted a mere 108 minutes. The political myth it spawned about the perfect, godless Soviet hero has lasted forever.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you to mull over as you transition out of this deep dive.
The state created the perfect, smiling, godless icon. But the real Yuri Gagarin, the short, cushion-sitting wartime saboteur, the troubled husband, the ambitious engineer, and the reluctant celebrity, did the real man ever truly escape the suffocating weight of the propaganda surrounding the first human in space?
That is the ultimate trade-off of becoming a global legend. The achievement is forever yours, but the narrative often belongs entirely to the rest of the world.
A profound thought on a complicated legend and the heavy price of being an icon. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life of Yuri Gagarin. We'll see you next time.